Our first reading today is from the book of Genesis, portions of chapter 1 and 2. So God created humankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. And from the book of Isaiah, chapter 62, verses 1 through 3. For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not remain quiet, till her vindication shines out like the dawn, her salvation like a blazing torch. The nations will see your vindication, and all kings your glory. You will be called by a new name that the mouth of the Lord will bestow. You will be a crown of splendor in the Lord's hand, a royal diadem in the hand of your God. May God bless the hearing and the living of this word. And from the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, from Secrets of Heaven, number 8893. And he rested on the seventh day means that at that time peace and good of love are present. This is clear from the meaning of resting as peace, and from the meaning of the seventh day as the state of celestial love, and therefore what is holy. The reason why resting on the seventh day means peace in the good of love is that before a person has been regenerated or created anew, there is no serenity or rest, since their natural life engages in conflict at that time with their spiritual life and wishes to have dominion over it. Consequently, the Lord at that time labors, for he fights for the person against hells that attack. But as soon as the good of love has been implanted, conflict comes to an end and rest takes over. For now the person is brought into heaven and led by the Lord in accord with the laws of order there, and so is at peace. These things are meant by Jehovah's rest on the seventh day. So, my friends, welcome to the seventh and final installment in our sermon series, The 7 Types of Rest. Now, I've drawn these 7 types from the work of Sandra Dalton Smith, MD, in her book, Sacred Rest, and I invite you to check that out if you have any interest. Today, we will be talking about spiritual rest. So last week, we explored the notion of creative rest, and the ways that engaging with beauty and wonder enfold us all into the ongoing creative forces with which God enlivens the world. Today, we hear in our Genesis text an ancient poem that tells the story about the way God created the world in the beginning. In the parts we didn't read, God first says, "Let there be light." God makes the sky and the oceans and the land. God makes plants and all kinds of vegetation. God makes the sun and the moon and the stars. God makes birds, sea creatures, and animals. And then we come to our text for today, the sixth day, when God makes human beings and places them in a world that will nourish them. We read, God saw all he had made, and it was very good. So on the seventh day, God is said to have rested from all this creating. Now, in the Swedenborgian perspective, we don't see this as a literal story of how the earth came to be, or even just an ancient oral tradition, but as a metaphor for the spiritual life of a human being. The beginning of Genesis tells the story of creation of the world, while at the same time, at a deeper level, tells the story of the creation of our internal lives. The details of all of that will make a great series some other time, but for the purposes today, we will skip right to the end. The seventh day, the holy day of rest, represents a stage in our spiritual development when we have assimilated divine love and truth so deeply that it is written on our hearts. Swedenborg writes, "For people whose character is heavenly, their inner life is patterned in such a way that the Lord enters their understanding, reason, and knowledge by way of love and the convictions of love." Meaning that this is a point when our acceptance of divine love towards ourselves and others is so instinctual that there is no longer a time when we need to think about the right thing to do. We no longer need to convince ourselves via our conscience to do the right and loving thing. We just do it. Love drives us first and foremost. We might describe this as being a fully integrated person. We are so open to the flow of God that our external thinking doesn't get in the way of being kind and loving. This state of flow or integration allows for the experience of maximum spiritual freedom and is thus represented by the seventh day of rest. Because God blesses this day and sanctifies it, the Abrahamic traditions followed it as a spiritual practice, the Sabbath. But it's important to note that in this story, at least, we are talking about God resting. So on one level, God in Genesis models rest and advocates for cyclical and consistent rest for us in the blessing of the Sabbath. But in a spiritual sense, what this story is telling us is that God does not rest until we each reach the seventh day. In our process of ongoing creation, God continues to want what is best for us and continues to work for that no matter what. And this is the most incredible gift, a steadfast love and concern that the Bible often praises. In this sense, the seventh day is holy not just because of what God did and said in Genesis, but because of what God continues to do for our spiritual development, for us and with us now. So how do we connect these two things conceptually? Why is what God does important to our own practice of spiritual rest? Because our ability to receive spiritual rest is anchored in the notion of sanctuary. Dr. Dalton Smith defines sanctuary in this context as a secure place where protection reigns and comfort is received. Other definitions include the term refuge. God certainly desires and needs our partnership in the co-creation of our spiritual path. But it is important to recognize that this partnership is a partnership of consent, not a partnership of power. We are not the source of life, love, and truth. God is. And maybe in some ways that doesn't sound like a true partnership, but what it actually allows for is for us to be able to rest. It allows for us to be able to let go and find sanctuary. Swedenborg writes, "Spiritual people are called God's work after they have developed a heavenly nature, because the Lord has fought for them all on his own. He is the one who has made, formed, and created them. And that is why this verse says that God completed his work on the seventh day, and twice that he rested from all his work, because creating people anew, regenerating them, is the Lord's work alone. Because we have done none of the fighting ourselves, the Lord does all the fighting for us. He is the one who is said to rest." We can receive spiritual rest. We can rest from our spiritual labors because we know that God never does. We can rest because fundamentally we are not God. We are not the source. We are beneficiaries of the source. And there might be times when we're really feeling our various accomplishments, when we might trick ourselves into thinking that we are the source, that it is all up to us, and that we might just be able to control everything we need to control. But can we truly rest when we're in this headspace? Can we truly find sanctuary? Of course not. What makes the Sabbath holy is that it is an occasion when we recognize our limits. Now, our earthly selves may well be thinking, yuck, what an unpleasant realization. How can something as inherently depressing as recognizing our limits be holy? It is holy because the recognition of our limits cannot be separated from the recognition that God has our back. God would never, ever have created human beings without the basic operating setup of God's complete and unending support. What a monstrous God it would be to have created human beings and then only conditionally engage with them. That God does not exist. Instead, God created us and promised to walk with us always, promised to fight continually on our behalf until the only thing needed anymore was the presence and flow of love. This is what the creation story in Genesis pictures. It is like a parent holding onto a bicycle while a child is still learning to ride, running alongside, steadying the bike as we learn how to balance, how much pressure to give the pedals, how to keep the handlebars straight. And then, suddenly, balance is found and off we ride, and our heavenly parent can let go and watch us fly. They're not gone. They're still watching and cheering, but a fundamental new capacity has been gained by us, and the parent doesn't need to run anymore. We can find spiritual rest, spiritual sanctuary, in the holiness of the promise of the seventh day. God will not let go of the bike until then, not a single moment before we are ready. And so, we don't have to hold it all. We don't have to hold the seriousness and the weight of our entire spiritual journey all the time. We can joyfully surrender it to the one who is running alongside. Swedenborg writes, "None but those who have experienced a state of peace can appreciate the nature of the peaceful tranquility that the outer self enjoys when there is an end to struggle, or to the disquiet of burning desires and misconceptions. That state is so joyful that it surpasses all our notions of joy. It is not simply an end to our struggles, but a vibrancy welling up from a deep-seated peace, affecting our outer being beyond the capacity of words to describe it." Amen.